Okay, chapter 11. A new chapter in a novel is something like a new scene in a play. And when I drop the curtain this time, reader, you must fancy you see a room in the George Inn at Millcote, with such large figured papering on the walls as inn rooms have, such as a carpet, furniture, ornaments on the mantelpiece, such prints including a portrait of George III and another of the Prince of Wales, and a representation of the death of Wolfe. All of this is visible to you by the light of an oil lamp hanging from the ceiling, and by that of an excellent fire, near which I sit in my cloak and bonnet. My muff and umbrella lie on the table, and I'm warming away the numbness and chill contracted by 16 hours of exposure to the rawness of an October day. I left Lowtown at 4 o'clock a.m., and the Millcote town clock just strikes 8. Reader, though I look comfortably accommodated, I'm not very tranquil in mind. I thought when the coach stopped here that there would be someone to meet me. I looked anxiously round as I descended the wooden steps, the booths placed for my convenience, expecting to hear my name pronounced and to see some sort of description of a carriage waiting to convey me to Thornfield. Nothing of the sort was visible. And when I asked a waiter if anyone had been to inquire after Miss Eyre, I was answered in the negative. So I had no resource but to request to be shown into a private room, and here I am waiting, while all sorts of doubts and fears are troubling my thoughts. It is a very strange sensation to inexperienced youth to feel itself quite alone in the world. Yeah, this girl is 18, as an orphan, sent to a school, basically a nunnery with all-girls school, never left, never been to the outside world, then for that to be your first job, and then at 18 years old to get in a carriage, not getting an Uber, getting a carriage. No, couldn't have done it. No, respect. Anyways, it says it's a very strange sensation to inexperienced you to feel itself quite alone in the world, cut adrift from every connection, uncertain whether the port to which it is bound can be reached, and prevented by many impediments from returning to that it has quitted. Yeah, she can't go back. The charm of adventure sweetens that sensation. The glow of pride warms it, but then the throb of fear disturbs it, and fear with me became predominant. When half an hour elapsed and still I was alone, I thought to myself to ring the bell. Is there a place in this neighborhood called Thornfield? I asked to the waiter who answered the summons. Thornfield? I don't know, ma'am. I'll inquire at the bar. He vanished but reappeared instantly. Is your name Aramis? Yes. Person here. Just okay. Jane is using a lot of big words. Essentially, someone came to get her. She's about 6 miles out from Thornfield. How long shall we be before we get there? Happen an hour and a half. He fastened the car door, climbed to his own seat outside, and we set off. Our progress was leisurely, and he gave me ample time to reflect. I was content to be at length so near the end of my journey, and as I leaned back in the comfortable though not elegant conveyance, I meditated much at my ease. I suppose, thought I, judging from the plainness of the servant and carriage, Mrs. Fairfax is not a very dashing person. So much the better. I never lived amongst fine people but once, and I was very miserable with them. I wonder if she lives alone except this little girl. If so, and if she is in any degree amiable, I shall surely be able to get on with her. I will do my best. It is a pity that doing one's best does not always answer. Damn, it's a yeah. At Lowood, indeed, I took that resolution, kept it, and succeeded in pleasing. But with Mrs. Reed, I remember my best was always spurned with scorn. I pray to God that Mrs. Fairfax may not turn out to be a second Mrs. Reed, but if she does, I'm not bound to stay with her. Let the worst come to the worst, I can advertise again. How far are we on the road now, I wonder? I let down the window and looked out. Millcote was behind us. Judging by the number of lights, it seemed a place of considerable magnitude, much larger than Lowden. We were now, as far as I could see, on some sort of common, but there were houses scattered all over the district. I felt we were in a different region to Lowood, more populous, less picturesque, more stirring, less romantic. The roads were heavy, the night misty. My conductor let his horse walk all the way, and the hour and a half extended, I verily believe, to 2 hours. At last he turned in his seat and said, "You're not so far now." Again I looked out. We were passing a church. I saw its low-browed tower across the sky, and its bell was tolling a quarter. Probably should turn on it. I saw a narrow galaxy of lights too on a hillside, marking a village or hamlet. Hamlet. I might have to look that up. About 10 minutes after, the driver got down and opened a pair of gates. We passed through and they clashed to behind us. We now slowly ascended a drive and came upon the long front of a house. Candlelit gleamed from one curtained bow window. All the rest were dark. The car stopped at the front door. It was opened by a maidservant. I alighted and went in. "Will you walk this way, ma'am?" said the girl. Okay. I followed her across a square hall with high doors all round. She ushered me into a room whose double illumination of fire and candle at first dazzled me, contrasting as it did with the darkness in which my eyes had been accustomed to for 2 hours. A snug small room, a round table by a cheerful fire, an armchair, high-backed and old-fashioned, wherein sat the neatest imaginable little elderly lady in a widow's cap, black silk gown, and snowy muslin apron, exactly like what I had fancied Mrs. Fairfax, only less stately and milder looking. She was occupied in knitting. A large cat sat demurely at her feet. Nothing, in short, was wanting to complete the beau ideal of domestic comfort. A more reassuring introduction for a new governess could scarcely be conceived. There was no grandeur to overwhelm, no stateliness to embarrass. And then, as I entered, the old lady got up and promptly and kindly came forward to meet me. "How do you do, dear? I'm afraid you have had a tedious ride. John drives so slowly. You must be cold. Come to the fire." "Mrs. Fairfax, I suppose," said I. "Yes, you are right. Do sit down." She conducted me to her own chair and then began to remove my shawl and untie my bonnet strings. I begged she would not give herself such trouble. "Oh, it is no trouble. I dare say your own hands are almost numbed with cold. Leah, make a little hot negus. Okay. Negus. And cut a sandwich or two. Here are the keys to the storeroom." And she produced from her pocket a most housewifely bunch of keys and delivered them to the servant. "Now, then draw near to the fire. You've brought your luggage with you, haven't you?" "Yes, ma'am." I hate reading dialogue. "I'll see it carried into your room." She treats me like a visitor, thought I. I little expected such a reception. I anticipated only coldness and stiffness. This is not like what I've heard of the treatment of governesses, but I must not exult too soon. She returned with her own hands. Side note, Jane makes me so sad. See, you be meeting shitty people your whole life and then you just expect everybody to be crappy. Anyways, she returned with her own hands, cleared her knitting apparatus and a book or two from the table to make room for the tray which Leah now brought, and then herself handed me the refreshments. I felt rather confused at being the object of more attention than I had ever been before received, and that too shown by my employer and superior. But as she did not herself seem to consider what she was doing anything out of place, I thought it better to take her civilities. Okay. I felt rather confused at being the object of more attention than I had ever before received, and that too shown by my employer and superior. But as she did not herself seem to consider what she was doing anything out of place, I thought it better to take her civilities quietly. "Shall I have the pleasure of seeing Miss Fairfax tonight?" Not Mrs. Fairfax, I asked, when I had partaken of what she offered me. "What did you say, my dear?" "I'm a little deaf," returned the good lady, approaching her ear to my mouth. I repeated the question more distinctly. "Miss Fairfax? Oh, you mean Miss Varans. Miss Varans is the name of your future pupil. I can't say her last name is French. Indeed. Then is she not your daughter?" "No, I have no family. This ain't her house. Anyways, I should have followed up my first inquiry by asking in what way Miss Verons was connected to her, but I recollected it was not polite to ask too many questions. Besides, I was sure to hear in time. I'm so glad, she continued as she sat down opposite to me and took the cat on her knee. I'm so glad you are come. It will be quite pleasant living here now with companionship. To be sure, it is pleasant at any time for Thornfield is a fine old hall, rather neglected of late years perhaps, but still it is one of the most respectable places. Yet, you know, in winter time one feels dreary quite alone, even in the best quarters. I say alone. Lee is a very nice girl, to be sure, and John and his wife are very decent people, but then, you see, they are only servants, and one can't converse with them on terms of equality. You must keep them at due distance for fear of losing one's authority. I'm sure last winter, it was a very severe one if you recollect, and when it did not snow, it rained and blew. Not a creature but the butcher and postman came to the house from November to February, and I really got quite melancholy with sitting night after night alone. I had Leah in to read to me sometimes, but I don't think the poor girl liked the task much. She felt it confining. In spring and summer, once I got better, sunshine and long days make such a difference. And then, just as the commencement of this autumn, little Adela Ferrans came, and her nurse. A child makes a house alive all at once, and now you are here. I shall be quite gay. My heart really warmed to the worthy lady as I heard her talk, and I drew my chair a little nearer to her and expressed my sincere wish that she might find my company as agreeable as she anticipated. But I'll not keep you sitting up late tonight, she said. It is on the stroke of 12 now, and you have been traveling all day. You must feel tired. Yeah. If you've got your feet well warmed, I'll consider what she was doing anything out of place. I thought it better to take her civilities quietly. Shall I have the pleasure of seeing Miss Fairfax tonight? Not Mrs. Fairfax, I asked, when I had partaken of what she offered me. What did you say, my dear? I'm a little deaf, returned the good lady, approaching her ear to my mouth. I repeated the question more distinctly. Miss Fairfax? Oh, you mean Miss Varans. Miss Varans is the name of your future pupil. I can't say her last name is French. Indeed. Then is she not your daughter? No, I have no family. This ain't her house. Anyways, I should have followed up my first inquiry by asking in what way Miss Varans was connected to her, but I recollected it was not polite to ask too many questions. Besides, I was sure to hear in time. I'm so glad, she continued as she sat down opposite to me and took the cat on her knee. I'm so glad you are come. It will be quite pleasant living here now with companionship. To be sure, it is pleasant at any time for Thornfield is a fine old hall, rather neglected of late years perhaps, but still it is one of the most respectable places. Yet, you know, in winter time one feels dreary quite alone, even in the best quarters. I say alone. Lee is a very nice girl, to be sure, and John and his wife are very decent people, but then, you see, they are only servants, and one can't converse with them on terms of equality. You must keep them at due distance for fear of losing one's authority. I'm sure last winter, it was a very severe one if you recollect, and when it did not snow, it rained and blew. Not a creature but the butcher and postman came to the house from November to February, and I really got quite melancholy with sitting night after night alone. I had Leah in to read to me sometimes, but I don't think the poor girl liked the task much. She felt it confining. In spring and summer, once I got better, sunshine and long days make such a difference. And then, just as the commencement of this autumn, little Adela Ferrans came, and her nurse. A child makes a house alive all at once, and now you are here. I shall be quite gay. My heart really warmed to the worthy lady as I heard her talk, and I drew my chair a little nearer to her and expressed my sincere wish that she might find my company as agreeable as she anticipated. But I'll not keep you sitting up late tonight, she said. It is on the stroke of 12 now, and you have been traveling all day. You must feel tired. Yeah. If you've got your feet well warmed, okay. This was an idea. I'm about to go to bed. I'll do part 2 tomorrow. I don't know. Okay, I can't sleep, so let's try to finish at least chapter 11. So, she's arrived at Thornfield. She's met Mrs. Fairfax and now up to bed. Okay. I thanked her for a considerate choice, and as I really felt fatigued with my long journey, expressed my readiness to retire. She took her candle, and I followed her from the room. First, she went to see if the hall door was fastened. Having taken the key from the lock, she led the way upstairs. The steps and banisters were of oak. The staircase window was high and latticed. Both it and the long gallery into which the bedroom doors opened looked as if they belonged to a church rather than to a house. A very chill and vault-like air pervaded the stairs and gallery, suggesting cheerless ideas of space and solitude, and I was glad, when finally ushered into my chamber, to find it of small dimensions and furnished in ordinary modern style. When Mrs. Fairfax had bidden me a kind good night and I had fastened my door, gazed leisurely round, and in some measure effaced the eerie impression made by the wide hall, that dark and spacious staircase, and that long cold gallery, by the livelier aspect of my little room, I remembered that after a day of bodily fatigue and mental anxiety, I was now at last in safe haven. That one sentence is 6 lines long. I'm long-winded, but Miss Charlotte was... Anyways, the impulse of gratitude swelled my heart, and I knelt down at the bedside and offered up thanks where thanks were due, not forgetting, ere I rose, to implore aid on my further path, and the power of meriting the kindness which seemed so frankly offered me before it was earned. My couch had no thorns in it that night, my solitary room no fears. At once weary and content, I slept soon and soundly. When I woke, it was broad day. So like her, she appreciative. The chamber looked such a bright little place to me as the sun shone in between the gray-blue window curtains, showing papered walls and a carpeted floor, sawn like the bare planks and stained plastered of low wood, that my spirits rose at the view. Externals have a great effect on the young. I don't have a nice house on anybody. I thought that a fair era of life was beginning for me, one that was to have its flowers and pleasures as well as its thorns and toils. My faculties roused by the change of scene, the new field offered hope, seemed all astir. I cannot precisely define what they expected, but it was something pleasant, not perhaps that day or that month, but at an indefinite future period. I rose. I dressed myself with care. Okay. Jane is responsible. She's up for her first day of work. I rose. I dressed myself with care, obliged to be plain, for at no article of attire that was not made with extreme simplicity. I was still by nature solicitous to be neat. It was not my habit to be disregardful of appearance or careless of the impression I made. On the contrary, I ever wished to look as well as I could, and to please as much as my want of beauty would permit. I sometimes regretted that I was not handsomer. I sometimes wished to have rosy cheeks, a straight nose, and a small cherry mouth. I desired to be tall, stately, and finely developed in figure. I felt it a misfortune that I was so little, so pale, and had features so irregular and so marked. And why had I these aspirations? You know what's crazy? When I read that description, the person I picture, never mind, it's beautiful, but I don't want to make, okay, anyways, but when I read that, I think of like Kristen Stewart kind of beauty, but anyways, doesn't matter. Like it's that girl from Stranger Things, not Millie, the other one, little, like petite. Anyway, doesn't matter. Anyways, okay. It would be so difficult to say. I could not then distinctly say it to myself, yet I had a reason, and a logical, natural reason too. However, when I had brushed my hair very smooth and put on my black frock, which, Quaker-like as it was, at least had the merit of fitting to a nicety, and adjusted my clean white tucker, I thought I should do respectably enough to appear before Mrs. Fairfax, and that my new pupil would not at least recoil from me with antipathy. Having opened my chamber window and seen that I had left all things straight and neat on the toilet table, I ventured forth. Traversing the long and matted gallery, I descended the slippery steps of oak, then I gained the hall. I halted there a minute. I looked at some pictures on the walls and a bronze lamp pendant from the ceiling, and at the great clock whose case was of oak, curiously carved in ebon black with time and rubbing. Ebon. It says ebon, not ebony. Ebon black. I'm gonna look that up. Okay. Everything appeared very stately and imposing to me, but then I was so little accustomed to grandeur. The hall door, which was half glass, stood open. I stepped over the threshold. It was a fine autumn morning. The early sun shone serenely on groves and still green fields. Advancing onto the lawn, I looked up and surveyed the front of the mansion. It was 3 stories high, of proportions not vast, though considerable. A gentleman's manor house, not a nobleman's seat. Battlements round the top gave it a picturesque look. I don't know what battlements are, but I'm assuming. Its grey front stood out well from the background of a rookery whose cawing tenants were now on the wing. They flew over the lawn and grounds to alight in a great meadow from which there was separated by a sunk fence, and where an array of mighty old thorn trees, strong, knotty, and broad as oaks, at once explained the etymology of the mansion's designation. Anyway, she's so descriptive. I love her, but damn. Further off were hills, not so lofty as those round Lowood, nor so craggy, nor so like barriers of separation from the living world, but yet quiet and lonely hills enough, and seeming to embrace Thornfield with the seclusion I had not expected to find existent so near the stirring locality of Millcote. Oh, so he ducked off. Okay. She could have just said that. A little hamlet whose roofs were blent with trees straggled up the side of one of the hills. The church of the district stood near Thornfield. Its old tower top looked like a knoll between the house and gates. I was yet enjoying the calm prospect in pleasant, fresh air, yet listening with delight to the cawing of the rooks, yet surveying the wide front of the hall and thinking what a great place it is for one lonely little dame like Mrs. Fairfax to inhabit, when the lady appeared at the door. "What, out already?" said she. "I see you are an early riser." Abuse. I went up to her and was received with a kiss and a shake on the hand. "How do you like Thornfield?" she asked. I told her I liked it very much. "Yes," she said, "it is a pretty place, but I fear it will be getting out of order unless Mr. Rochester should take it into his head to come and reside here permanently, or at least visit it rather oftener. Great houses and fine grounds require the presence of the proprietor." "Mr. Rochester," I explained. "Who is he?" "The owner of Thornfield," she responded quietly. "Did you not know he was called Rochester?" Of course I did not. I had never heard of him before, but the old lady seemed to regard his existence as a universally understood fact, which everybody must be acquainted with. "I thought," I continued, "Thornfield belonged to you." "To me? Bless you, child. Thank you. What an idea. To me, I'm only the housekeeper, the manager. To be sure, I'm distinctly related to the Rochesters by the mother's side, or at least my husband was. He was a clergyman, incumbent of Hay, that little village yonder on the hill, and that church near the gate was his. The present Mr. Rochester's mother was a Fairfax, and second cousin to my husband, but I never presume on the connection. In fact, it is nothing to me. I consider myself quite in the light of an ordinary housekeeper. My employer is always civil, and I expect nothing more. And the little girl, my pupil? She is Mr. Rochester's ward. He commissioned me to find a governess for her." Okay, here comes Adele. So, she's Mr. Rochester's ward. He commissioned me to find a governess for her. He intends to have her brought up in the Shire, I believe. Here she comes with her bonne, as she calls her nurse. The enigma was then explained. This affable and kind little widow was no great dame, but a dependent like myself. I did not like her the worse for that. On the contrary, I felt better pleased than ever. The equality between her and I was so real, not the mere result of condescension on her part, so much the better. My position was all the freer. As I was meditating on this discovery, a little girl, followed by her attendant, came running up the lawn. I looked at my pupil, who did not at first appear to notice me. She was quite a child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. slightly built with a pale, small-featured face and a redundancy of hair falling into curls at her waist. "Good morning, Miss Adela," said Mrs. Fairfax. "Come and speak to the lady who's to teach you and to make you a clever woman some day." She approached. "C'est la ma... I'm not good with French. All I know is les bon ton." She says, "Are you my governess?" Pointing to me and addressing her nurse, who answered something, certainly. "Are they foreigners?" I inquired, amazed at hearing the French language. "The nurse is a foreigner, and Adela was born on the continent, and I believe never left it till within 6 months ago. When she first came here, she could speak no English. Now she can make a shift to talk a little. I don't understand her, though. She mixes it so with French, but you will make out her meaning very well, I dare say." Fortunately, I had the advantage of being taught French by a French lady, and I had always made it a point to converse with the madame as often as I could, and had, besides, during the last 7 years, learnt a portion of French by heart daily, applying myself to take pains with my accent and imitating as closely as possible the pronunciation of my teacher. I had acquired a certain degree of readiness and correctness in the language, and was not likely to be much at loss with Mademoiselle Adela. She came and shook hands with me when she heard that I was her governess, and as I led her into the breakfast, I addressed some phrases to her in her own tongue. She replied briefly at first, but after we were seated at the table and she examined me for some 10 minutes with her large hazel eyes, she suddenly commenced chattering fluently. "Ah," she cried in French, "you speak my language as well as Mr. Rochester does. I can talk to you as I can to him, and so can Sophie. She will be so glad. No one here understands her. Madame Fairfax is all English. Sophie is my nurse. She came with me over the sea in a great ship with a chimney that smoked. How it did smoke! And I was sick, and so is Sophie, and so is Mr. Rochester. Mr. Rochester lay down on..." Okay, I've read ahead. Adele speaks a lot of French. I do not speak French. I'm not going to even do that, so we're going to skip ahead. Essentially, Adele was taken to be with Mr. Rochester after her mom died, and her mom used to be an opera singer, so Adele has some interesting talents. Okay, so it says, "After your mama went to the Holy Virgin, as you say, with whom did you live then?" "With Madame Frederic and her husband. She took care of me, but she's nothing related to me. I think she's poor, for she had not so fine a house as mamma. I was not long there. Mr. Rochester asked me if I would like to go and live with him in England, and I said yes, for I knew Mr. Rochester before I knew Madame Frederic, and he was always kind to me and gave me pretty dresses and toys. But you see, he's not kept his word, for he brought me to England, and now he's gone back again by himself, and I never see him." Okay. After breakfast, Adele and I withdrew to the library, which it appears Mr. Rochester had directed should be used as the schoolroom. Most of the books were locked up behind glass doors, but there was one bookcase left open containing everything that could be needed in way of elementary works, and several volumes of light literature, poetry, biography, travels, and a few romances. I suppose he had considered that these were all the governesses would acquire for her private pursuit, and indeed they contented me amply for the present. Compared with the scanty pickings I had now and then been able to glean at Lowood, they seemed to offer an abundant harvest of entertainment and information. In this room, too, there was a cabinet piano, quite new and a superior tone, also an easel for painting, and a pair of globes. Jane's appreciative, but that is why I like her. She don't take what she got. I found my pupil sufficiently docile, though disinclined to apply. I was like, disciplined. Okay, so she's docile, but not gonna apply herself. She had not been used to regular occupation of any kind. I felt it would be injudicious to confine her too much at first, so when I talked to her a great deal and got her to learn a little, and when the morning had advanced to noon, I allowed her to return to her nurse. I then proposed to occupy myself till dinner time in drawing some little sketches for her use. As I was going upstairs to fetch my portfolio and pencils, Mrs. Fairfax called to me. "Your morning school hours are over now, I suppose," she said. She was in a room, the folding doors of which stood open. I went in and she addressed me. It It was a large, stately apartment with purple chairs and curtains, a turkey carpet, walnut paneled walls, one vast window rich in stained glass, and a lofty ceiling. Mrs. Fairfax was dusting some. Okay, again, reading ahead. Mr. Rochester has a very beautifully furnished home. I'm not reading two paragraphs about it with words I do not understand. Now, Miss Fairfax is in the dining room cleaning it. Jane exclaims, "It's such a nice room." It is a nice room. He's rich. Continuing. "In what order do you keep these rooms, Miss Fairfax?" said I. "No dust, no canvas coverings, except that the air feels chilly. One would think they were inhabited daily." Why, Miss Eyre, why, Miss Eyre? Though Mr. Rochester's visits here are rare, they are always sudden and unexpected, and as I observed that it put him out to find everything swathed up and to have a bustle of arrangement on his arrival, I thought it best to keep the rooms in readiness. I used to think that that was an exaggeration, but you would be amazed at how quickly things get dusty and dirty if you don't touch them. Like, it's ridiculous. Anyways, is Mr. Rochester an exacting, fastidious sort of man? Not particularly so, but he has a gentleman's tastes and habits, and he expects to have things managed in conformity to them. Do you like him? Is he generally liked? Oh, yes. The family have always been respected here. Almost all of the land in this neighborhood, as far out as you can see, has belonged to the Rochesters, time out of mind. Well, but leaving his land out of the question, do you like him? Is he liked for himself? I have no cause to do otherwise than like him, and I believe he is considered a just and liberal landlord by his tenants, but he's never lived much amongst them. But he has no peculiarities. What, in short, is his character? Oh, his character is unimpeachable, I suppose. He's rather peculiar, perhaps. He has traveled a great deal and seen a great deal of the world, I should think. I dare say he's clever, but I never had much conversation with him. In what way is he peculiar? I don't know. It's not easy to describe. Nothing striking, but you feel it when he speaks to you. You cannot be always sure if he's in jest or in earnest. I love those people and I hate them at the same time, because be fucking for real. Whether he is pleased or the contrary, you don't thoroughly understand him. In short, or at least I don't, but it is of no consequence. He's a very good master. This was all the account I got from Miss Fairfax of her employer and mine. There are people who seem to have no notion of sketching a character or observing or describing salient points, either in persons or things. The good lady evidently belonged to this class. My queries puzzled, but did not draw her out. Mr. Rochester was Mr. Rochester in her eyes, a gentleman, a land proprietor, nothing more. She inquired and searched no further, and evidently wondered at my wish to gain more definite notion of his identity. When we left the dining room, she proposed to show me over the rest of the house, and I followed her upstairs and downstairs, admiring as I went, for all was well arranged and handsome. The large front chambers, I thought, more pages. Okay. So, when we left the dining room, she proposed to show me over the rest of the house, and I followed her upstairs and downstairs, admiring as I went, for all was well arranged and handsome. The large front chambers I thought especially grand, and some of the third-story rooms, though dark and low, were interesting from their air of antiquity. The furniture once appropriated to the lower apartments had from time to time been removed here, as fashions changed, and the imperfect light entering by their narrow casements showed bedsteads of 100 years old, chests and oaks or walnut, looking with their strange carvings of palm branches and cherub heads, like types of the Hebrew ark. Rows of venerable chairs, high-backed and narrow, stools still more antiquated. Okay, he got a lot of stuff. Old, rich, nice stuff. A shrine of memory, she calls it. I like the hush, the gloom, the quaintness of these retreats in the day, but I by no means coveted a night's repose on any of those wide and heavy beds, shut in, some of them with doors of oak, shaded, others with wrought old English hangings crusted with thick work, portraying effigies of strange flowers and stranger birds and stranger human beings, all of which would have looked strange indeed by the pallid gleam of the moonlight. Do the servants sleep in these rooms? I asked. No, they occupy a range of smaller apartments to the back. No one ever sleeps here. One would almost say that if there were a ghost at Thornfield Hall, this is what it would be to haunt. This would be its haunt. Yes, okay. So I think you have no ghosts then. None that I've ever heard of, returned Mrs. Fairfax, smiling. nor any traditions of one, no legends or ghost stories. I believe not, and yet it is said the Rochesters have been rather a violent than a quiet race in their time. Perhaps, though, that is the reason they rest tranquilly in their graves now. Yes, after life's fitful fever they sleep well, I muttered. Where are you going now, Mrs. Fairfax? For she was moving away. On to the leads. Will you come up and see the view from thence? I followed still up to a narrow staircase to the attics, and thence by a ladder and through a trapdoor to the roof of the hall. Damn. I was now on a level with the crow colony and could see into their nests. Leaning over the battlements and looking far down, I surveyed the grounds laid out like a map. The bright and velvet lawn closely girding the gray base of the mansion, the field wide as a park, dotted with its ancient timber, the wood dun and sere. I thought dun was pale. Anyways, divided by a path visibly overgrown. I need to look these words up. I need to underline the words I don't understand. Greener with moss than the trees were with foliage. The church at the gates, the road, the tranquil hills, all reposing in the autumn's day sun. Jane, I love you, but again, okay, beautiful mansion, beautiful views. Rochester got money. House is great. We're descending from the attic, and then Jane hears a laugh. A distinct, formal, mirthless laugh. I stopped. The sound ceased only for an instant. It began again louder. For at first, though distinct, it was very low. It passed off in a clamorous peal that seemed to wake an echo in every lonely chamber, though it only originated in one, and I could have pointed out the door where the accents issued. Mrs. Fairfax, I called out, for I now heard her descending the great stairs. Did you hear that loud laugh? Who is it? Some of the servants, very likely, she answered. Perhaps Grace Poole. Did you hear it? I again inquired. Yes, plainly. I often hear her. She sews in one of these rooms. Sometimes Leah is with her. They are frequently noisy together. The laugh was repeated in its low syllabic tone and terminated in an odd murmur. Grace, exclaimed Miss Fairfax. I really did not expect any Grace to answer, for the laugh was as tragic as preternatural. Preternatural? A laugh as any I ever heard. I need to look that up. But that it was high noon, and that no circumstance of ghostliness accompanied the curious cachinnation, but that neither scene nor season favored fear, I should have been superstitiously afraid. However, the event showed me I was a fool for entertaining a sense even of surprise. Okay, the laugh was weird. It happened at a weird time. Later on, she realizes that she should have known then, basically. Okay, the door nearest me opened and a servant came out. A woman of between 30 and 40, a set, square-made figure, red-haired and with a hard, plain face. Any apparition less romantic or less ghostly could scarcely be conceived. Too much noise, Grace, said Mrs. Fairfax. Remember directions. Grace curtsied silently and went in. That's rude. She's a person we have to sue and assist Leah in her housemaid's work, continued the widow. Not altogether unobjectionable in some points, but she does well enough. By the by, how have you got on with your new pupil this morning? The conversation thus turned on Adele, continued till we reached the light and cheerful region below. Adele came running up to meet us in the hall, exclaiming, in French, we found dinner ready and waiting for us in Mrs. Fairfax's room. And we're on to chapter 12. Damn. Okay. Now, if only I could keep doing this. This is going to help me finish the book, but I don't know.